All right. Well, I think it's about as good a time to start as any. Thank you, everyone who's here and punctual. I know by 10 a.m. it can be a little bit hard to be on top of your schedule for the morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for using the Hogan 360 for maximum impact. My name is Kate Modic. I'm an Associate Director here at Peterberry Consultancy. And I have the honor today of being joined by my boss and mentor, Mr. Peterberry himself, the Managing Director for Peterberry Consultancy and founder. Say hi, Peter.
Hi, Kate, and I'm in Sydney where there's a spot of rain today, but I know you're in beautiful California, just enjoying the quality of life.
That's true. I am. Yeah. The country's falling apart, but the weather is beautiful. I'll say that. Yeah. So for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of hearing Peter speak before, as I mentioned, he is the founder of Peterberry Consultancy, and he's also the creator of the Hogan 360. And he started working on the Hogan 360 and using it with his coaching clients back in the 80s when it was still really early days for the 360 market. So we really do have the pleasure of learning from one of Australia's, if not the world's, experts in 360s. And today we're really going to do our best to condense what Peter's learned in his decades of practicing into a 1-hour webinar around what you really need to know in the 360 space to be impactful. So what does that really boil down to? Our agenda for you for today is as follows. We'll start by anchoring the conversation in terms of why does it matter? So what really is the impact of leadership itself on 360, or pardon me, on performance overall? We'll talk about why engagement is such an important component within that and where that really pays off in terms of business results. And of course, we can't talk about engagement with actually looking at why do teams matter and how does that fit in. Then we're going to look more at the individual level in terms of ongoing individual development and the competencies for success. And last but not least, we're going to make sure we talk about how we actually support the development of those competencies with coaching and why this all ties together into such an important picture of having the 360 as kind of the through line that connects all of this. So that's what we've got in store for today. We're also very conscious that we want to make sure that we allow time for the questions you're going to bring to the conversation as well. So as we go through for today, please feel free to go ahead and pop questions into the chat, and hopefully we'll have time to address those at the end of the conversation today. So just take note of those, pop them in the chat, and then we'll come back to them. I've already seen one question from Paul. Yes, we will be sharing the slides after today's presentation, and we'll also share the recording for any of your colleagues who aren't able to attend, or if you're getting really excited and want to pass things on. I know for me, whenever I see slides with a lot of great data in them, I want to take screenshots of it and share it later, but I don't always remember how to articulate it. We've thought of all of that, so you just sit back and relax. So I think a good question to start us off today, Peter, is in terms of, you've worked with hundreds, if not thousands of leaders in Australia, around the world, and some of these are really prominent people. But I know that across those industries and those different experience levels, you start to see a lot of commonality in leaders. So when you look at some of the most common challenges that you're hearing from the clients that you work with, what are the main themes that stand out for you?
Thanks, Kate. A great question there. So I think the challenges we face are probably threefold. It's about growing better leaders, building high-performing teams, and enhancing the employee experience. So it's measured with good engagement scores and retention of staff. So let me preface it, Kate, by saying 80% of our problems in life are people issues, whether it's an ineffective leader, a dysfunctional team, 40% staff turnover. Organisations they have to have people and culture front and centre of mind if you're going to deliver on your bottom line goals and purpose and strategy. So I still get heaps of work in growing better leaders, and it could be working with high potentials to take them from good to great. It could be working with the CEO and the executive to make sure they're all at the top quartile measured by a 360. Or it could be we've got some bottom 10% leaders and they're toxic, they're dysfunctional. At worst, it could be bullying, aggression. So thank God that leadership is measurable and improvable. And that just means we can use personality assessments, 360 data. And if we just go back a sec, Kate, it would be building the high-performing teams. And a lot of teams today are still dysfunctional. It's the old Patrick Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions of teams. And our audience today would be able to relate to having seen great teams and equally having experienced dysfunctional teams. And we always say that leadership is about results. Teams deliver results, judge the leader by their team. So there ought to be a lot of work sharing your personality and 360 data as part of building high-performing teams. And as I mentioned, driving employee engagement because it pays. It's all about achieving top quartile survey engagement results and having very low turnover of staff compared to your industry. So we've always got people issues to deal with, and the 360 can be an important tool.
I think that's a really good point, Peter. And I got a little excited in terms of showing your model for how you represent how those things come together. But for the audience's benefit, can you walk through a bit around how you see that connection between 360's engagement and organizational performance?
Sure, absolutely. So the philosophy we have, and I'm going to show you supporting data in a moment, the leader can have 50 to 70% of the impact on the performance, the behaviour and the results of a team. It's massively important. It's the most consequential force in business today. So we say that leadership drives the employee experience, which you measure by the level of engagement. 2 measures, engagement survey data and low staff turnover there. Then we know that engagement drives performance. So if you've got motivated people, great teams, people who recommend the organisation as a good place to work to friends and family, you're likely to enhance the performance. And we're going to show you supporting data in a moment. So on the screen, Kate, that's the model that we use with our clients. So should we focus on leadership and leadership improvement? Do you take people and engagement seriously? And do you want to achieve bottom line results? It's simplistic, but very, very powerful. So for example, one of our clients is Shell. They're a very big multinational. And at the head office in London, you go up to the 10th floor overlooking the River Thames. And as you come out of the lift, this model is up on the wall. It's their model. And we'll tell you about Shell as a case study a little bit later on. But we get very heartened to see sophisticated businesses using this model.
It's really true, Peter. And I think when we look at the organizations and the clients we work with who really stand out, they do directly make that connection between leadership, not just as a nice to have, but really being that main lever around engagement that ultimately enables performance. I think you said it in an interview with Hogan Assessments last week, in terms of at the end of the day, it's the workforce itself who's actually achieving those organizational outcomes and performances. Leaders don't do it by themselves. So maybe if we look at the other side of that, can you talk a little bit around, I suppose, why it matters so much to have an engaged workforce and what the impact of that looks like for an organization?
Of course, Kate, thank you very much. So there's a lot of global research out there at the moment which measures the level of engagement and conversely the level of disengagement. So we talk, for example, about culture and Sirota, Glit, a lot of sophisticated engagement survey providers, and they measure the percentage of staff that are engaged, which predicts retention and performance. And the opposite is measured, how many people would take a job down the road if offered one, meaning they're ready to quit either their boss, the team, or the job. Now, I've highlighted the number here, Kate. It's 1 in 3 are disengaged, 30 to 35%. As I said, that's supported by global data. So this is a global pandemic. It's across all industries in all countries. So one of the big challenges in business, and it ought to be a strategic challenge, not a HR challenge, is to improve the level of engagement and drive down the level of disengagement. So Jim Collins in Good to Great said, get the right people on the bus and get the wrong people off the bus. So initially you're trying to turn this 1/3 around by giving them better leaders, putting them in a good team, giving them meaningful work. But if they're toxic and they're sharing their misery with others, drinking vinegar for breakfast, sucking lemons for morning tea, their co-workers don't like them and they're waiting for you to do something about it. So engagement ought to be a strategic KPI in businesses. And the research we've done, Kate, is highlighted on the screen in the middle. When we ask people why they're leaving or why they're disengaged, number one is I don't get on with my boss. And then number two is I'm in a pretty toxic team. And three, I've got the wrong job. So these are big HR challenges. In the Gallup research, Gallup are a very sophisticated global company. I want to introduce the concept of the 70%. I mentioned that 50 to 70% of the variance in engagement is driven by the manager. So the manager has the most consequential impact on the workforce. And Gallup have got beautiful data here to show how engagement pays. So if engagement pays, it's the bottom line: revenue, customer retention, productivity, safety, absenteeism going down. These are all beautiful outcomes that businesses ought to be striving for. So therefore, an investment in better leadership and teams to drive the employee experience goes straight to the bottom line.
Mm. And Peter, I think we have even more research in terms of where that engagement can really have either a negative or positive effect. I think the latest report was from Reward Gateway. I guess this really summarizes a lot of what you've said already, and that we see a lot of those major providers agreeing in terms of the fact that there's a large proportion of the variance that can be explained by the manager in terms of that engagement level, and that's really where 360s come together. What else stood out for you from this trend report?
Well, this is interesting research. It says that 24% of people are doing the bare minimum, and I guess that's destroying the culture of an organisation if you've got nearly 1 in 4 that are putting in the bare minimum. And down the bottom, they support the earlier data that 70% of the variance is driven by the leader. So, that's why we think that there's a place for measuring leadership with the 360, improving leadership with the 360, setting a target on getting a better 360 next time round, because 360 is your reputation at a point in time, and you get evaluated by peers, direct reports, boss. So this gateway research just confirms that it is a huge challenge in business to get the leadership and people issues right. We've seen just too many experiences, Kate, both positive, great leaders and great teams that do an amazing job, and we're lucky to have many clients like that. But equally, we've got toxic leaders, and I'm often coaching a lot of those leaders, and you're checking for self-awareness, and the 360 is really the moment of truth when you confront someone with that data and they can look at themselves in the mirror.
And I think there's been some interesting models in terms of how organizations start to think about engagement more constructively, right? We do see more and more clients wanting to address the problem. What do you think about this one from Reward Gateway, Peter? What do you think that organizations should take away from this model?
Look, it's a cheeky model. It's a fun model. And this is from Reward Gateway. So I've got to acknowledge where we've sourced it. But the philosophy at Reward Gateway is that organizations should be trying to have ambassadors. So who are your ambassadors? They're positive people, they're engaged, they're team players, they're customer-centric, they're advocates for the business. Go-getters are okay, high energy, but maybe not committed long-term. Stayers are sort of okay. You can't have a team of champions 100%, but you've got to get rid of the detractors. And so it's sort of, that could be the 1 in 4 or the 1 in 3. And like I said, they're cruising, doing the bare minimum. And I would challenge our audience, if you had to write down a percentage of people in those 4 boxes that are on your payroll, how would you classify your workforce at the moment using those 4 camps? But essentially, it's about getting more in the right-hand space, getting less down the bottom in the left-hand space. And the benefits are, you can see the axis on the left, vertical, you're going to get discretionary effort, and down the bottom, horizontal, intention to stay. And that's what you want. Because, Kate, the cost of someone leaving if they resign to replace them is about $50,000. So if you've got 10% staff turnover, because detractors are leaving or the go-getters are finding something else, it really does kill your P&L down the bottom.
Yeah, especially when you think about the time that it takes to recoup those costs from employee productivity. I think there was some Gartner research that said that on average it takes between 6 to 12 months to recoup the cost of replacing an employee. So it's funny because I think this speaks to a lot of HR people where they know intuitively that it's so important to have engagement and that we want to support in a workforce who, does have the intention to stay and wants that high discretionary effort. But so often organizations aren't actually measuring kind of those hidden costs of what happens when employers are leaving.
And Kate, I think you've got some slides to speak to now about the benefits, the business outcomes from getting engagement.
You're right, Peter. I do. I am one of those people who loves data slides. So I guess on that theme of why disengagement isn't just kind of unfortunate or such a shame, but really does have a tangible impact on the business. This data comes from ihire.com, and they put together some aggregations of what different research findings have found in terms of the statistical impact with disengagement on an organization. So for my HR people out there who've been trying to get your CFOs or your COOs to pay attention to why this matters, this data is virtually every organization cares about things like absenteeism, safety, quality, shrinkage, productivity, revenue, and especially profitability, right? You take nothing else away saying that negative engagement correlates with negative profitability. That should be able to get people's attention to start to invest more in the things that we're talking about today. And happily, the other side of this equation is true, right? It's not just that disengagement is bad for business, but that engagement is really good for business. So this data comes from our partner, our platform provider, Qualtrics, and they've aggregated and done their own data in terms of when they look at their clients' engagement surveys versus how those clients perform. Even more staggering statistics. I mean, highly engaged companies outperform under-engaged companies by 2.5 times, in terms of revenue, double the net income. Those are really powerful statistics to start to unlock your imagination in terms of what would our organization be able to accomplish if we did have that more engaged workforce, where they were more productive, where they were becoming those advocates and recommending us, where, we didn't have the turnover where our talent acquisition team was constantly sourcing people and our managers were stuck in endless rounds of hiring interviews. So we could have a whole nother conversation around kind of that hiring and engagement process, but let's bring it back to why are we talking about 360s specifically? So this data comes from the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychologists. PBC presented in a panel for PSYOP last year, and this represents an aggregation of what the panel providers spoke about in terms of where the benefits were for 360s. And you can see that there's a really strong relationship here, very similar patterns of what we saw with increased engagement in terms of when we run 360s regularly, here's some of the benefits we see for an organization. 88% higher likelihood of retaining your high potential employees, right? The ones you're most concerned about keeping. 77% reported an improvement in decision-making, 27% decrease in employee turnover, and a 27% increase in customer satisfaction. So again, all really powerful metrics to drive home the case for why it's worth investing in these things. That being said, Peter, I feel like I've thrown a lot of data at the audience, and it can be hard to kind of conceptualize how all these things fit together. Do you want to simplify kind of where that relationship of analytics comes together for them?
Sure. Thanks, Kate. So the model we have, and it's one that is used by Shell and a number of our clients, is one, we're trying to measure and improve leadership effectiveness because it does drive the employee and customer experience and deliver business results. So the slide we're talking about here, Kate, is understanding the causal link and using analytics, data and science to be able to plot the metrics of combining these three. So number one, measuring and improving leadership effectiveness. As I said before, thank God that we know how to do it. Thank God we've got good tools to be able to use it. So at PBC, we're a very proud distributor of Hogan personality assessments, the bright side, the dark side, the inside, the private you, the you below the waterline, which generates self-awareness. Then we add, if we can, the Hogan 360, the multi-rater assessment, where your boss, your peers and reports give you feedback on your brand at work. And your brand at work is the key to your career success. Now, I always say, give me the personality assessments and the 360 and you've got no place to hide. You've got all the performance data you need. Then we have, here in Australia, our beautiful high-performing team assessment, where members of a team go online and rate the team. And this fits in with the concept of Patrick Lencioni, are we dysfunctional or great? And so they're the only three tools you can use. And Shell, for example, use the Hogan personality, the Hogan 360, and they have their own team assessment. Number two is, well, what's the impact of leaders, both great and not so great, on EX, the employee experience, and CX, the customer experience? So when we use EX or CX data, it's not just an engagement survey at a point in time, or a net promoter score at a point in time. It's what's the whole experience. So you take employees, what was the recruitment process like? What was the onboarding? What are the career and training opportunities? And so you want to link leadership's impact into number two. Then you go on to number three, and let's talk about the impact on the bottom line. What are the KPIs showing? Are you delivering against your business plan? Are you generating the performance outcomes? So, Kate, interestingly, there was some information a couple of years ago in some research conducted by Coach Source, which picks up on coaching trends. And 1/3 of companies are currently doing research to map the causal link. Another 1/3 would like to do it, but I'm not sure how to make those connections. And 1/3 haven't even thought about it. But I think it's an emerging trend. And in years to come, this would be a best practice approach to understanding analytics and using science to achieve better business outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Peter. And that's why we've seen such a prevalence of functions like people analytics, which really didn't even exist 15 years ago, that are becoming more and more common for large companies. But I think sometimes that can intimidate other organizations, right? They think, oh, we're not big enough or we're not sophisticated enough to have people analytics. What I really like about this model is it's actually a lot simpler than people realize, that we can just take a few key assessments and connect that to data you're already measuring and start to build that relationship without overcomplicating it too much.
Yeah. So, Kate, for example, say a manager gets a very good 360 result. I'll always ask, is your team achieving their KPIs? Is your workforce highly engaged? And the correlations are normally very strong. Equally, if someone gets a bad 360, you can expect that there could be staff turnover or low engagement scores, or that the customer experience is not good, or they're not achieving their KPIs. There's normally a clear line of data.
Yeah. Now, Peter, I want to come back to something that you kind of touched on here that one of our attendees has caught, which is you've mentioned this high-performing team assessment, but we haven't really talked that much about the role of where teams fit in on all of this. We've talked a lot about the individual level and the organizational level. So where do you see the role of teams in this whole equation?
Thanks, Kate. So one of my better one-liners is leadership is about results. Teams deliver results. So we should therefore judge the leader by their team. In other words, the performance and behaviour and engagement of your team is a reflection of the leader of that team. And I don't think enough organisations are focused on that concept. Even leadership spend is done on individuals rather than focusing on an intact team, where it's the team that is the core business unit of performance. So sometimes when I use this quote here, there's a light bulb moment for a leader. I've got to stop thinking about myself. I've got to start thinking more about my team. or the performance and culture of my team is more important than my own individual performance. So we do love to focus on teams, Kate. And if we get a chance to work with a team, we will do the personality, the 360 and the team diagnostic. And that just informs the development journey, the improvement journey, gives them plenty of work to do for the next 6 months. With the 360, Kate, we can also not just give individuals in a team their data, we can aggregate the data and give the team a score, a profile. So we can then track what are the strengths and opportunities for that team. Did the team score at the 75th percentile or the bottom 10 percentile? So that goal or number can then be a target. So I would encourage the audience to think, what are you doing in the space of teams? What are you doing around measuring and improving the behaviour, performance and culture of teams? For us, it's a no-brainer, and there's plenty to do.
And I'm curious, Peter, you do a lot of work with teams, and I know that you like to draw on Lencioni's work to kind of help anchor those conversations. What are some of the biggest, themes you see coming out from your team engagements?
Yeah. So look, we've got to acknowledge Patrick Lencioni and his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. This was awesome 15 years ago in all the business schools. Everyone referred to Lencioni, and what he put on the map is that teams can be good, great, or dysfunctional. And it got people thinking about teams when no one was ever talking about teams. So, all power to Patrick Lencioni for putting teams on the map. So a couple of key points. There's not enough leadership spent on teams. It's all done around individuals or, whether it's high potentials or succession planning. But the team is the unit of performance, as I said. So we ought to be focusing pretty heavily on teams. Lencioni is right. I'm still working with dysfunctional teams right now. I've got a publicly listed company where the CEO and the executive team is dysfunctional. The board doesn't know what to do about it, and there's 40% staff turnover. So it really hurts when you've got that toxic sort of culture in a team. It does take a lot of effort to get from good to great, application, investment, coaching, accountability. And what we find is the great teams have two distinguishing features. They are collaborative. Shared goals are more important than individual goals, and they're accountable. They hold each other accountable. Equally, they're the two things most missing in dysfunctional teams. So you end up with silos and poor performers getting away with poor performance. So we always like to say, give me the team personality data, what's below the waterline, give me the 360 data above the waterline, and we love to share this in teams. It requires trust, psychological safety. People have got to feel they can be open about that. And that's largely the role of the leader, to create that safe space.
Well, Peter, speaking of teams, I think we've done a really good job of presenting the research around why we're here for 360s and the impact behind it, but we haven't really done a very good job of introducing our team. So before we keep going into actually diving into how the 360 fits into all of this, I thought it would be remiss of me not to introduce a bit around who PBC are and, why we're here to talk to everyone today. So Peter Barry Consultancy, not coincidentally, was founded by Peter Barry himself about 30 years ago. And since then, we've really become one of the preeminent consultancies in Australia in terms of providing psychometric assessments. We've been a Hogan personality distributor and the premier Hogan personality distributor globally for over 30 years. And we've used that relationship with Hogan and their assessments to really build out our own expertise in coaching and all manner of different talent assessments and consulting services, especially around teams, as Peter has spoken about, but at the individual level, at the organizational level. And so everything that we do and everything we talk to you about today, as you can see, is very much informed by research and science, either by experts who've published their works previously or by our own research that we do in-house. And so when we're bringing you these solutions, recommendations, it is based on experience, absolutely, but it's also based on chewing through the data ourselves and working with our research teams to start to establish what those relationships look like. So that's a little bit about us. Now, I think if we're coming back to what we're here to talk about today, Peter, we've brought up 360 and personality a lot in this conversation, and we haven't even fully introduced what those things are. Why do we focus so much on those two types of instruments?
Oh, good question, Kate. So we love to use personality and 360 together. So on the left-hand side, you've got the 3 Hogan personality profiles. The blue one, the motives, values, preferences, inventory, idealized self, the person I want to be. It's a beautiful mirror to look into. HPI, the Hogan personality inventory, the bright side of personality, a behavioural snapshot. And the HDS, the Hogan Development Survey, which are strengths potentially becoming derailers if you're stressed or not at your best. So the blue is what I want out of life. The yellow is how I go about it. The red is how I hit a brick wall. Now, we talk about the personality giving us a snapshot of the private person, the private you, the you below the waterline. And then in the 360, which is the other component of this slide, which is your love note from work, what people think about you and how they're going to rate you. We're measuring self-management, relationship management, essentially their EQ measures. Then we work on business skills, working in and working on. And then we list 14 subsets there. So there's 2 key points to make here, Kate. If we have the personality and the 360 data, there's no place to hide. You've got all the data you need to coach, to run a leadership program, to invest in some team building. And the second point would be it's the most cost-effective and cheapest way to capture performance data. It doesn't cost a lot to put someone through personality and 360 data. And, that's more powerful than an annual performance review, being coached and having that data. So that's who we are. And they're world-class tools. They've got the highest level of validity and reliability. They're in business language. So we're very proud to have leading edge assessments.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are, Peter. And I like what you said about they're not that expensive. When I think about the data we were talking about earlier about what it costs to replace a high potential employee or someone you really wanted to retain. I know you and I have worked on a lot of coaching projects where we had people who were unhappy, and then using these 2 assessments together really helped that person unlock kind of where that source of conflict was and move forward to resolution. So I think you're right that it is a good investment. Now, a big question I often get from clients when they're approaching us with exactly that type of scenario, we've got someone we want to retain. They'll often ask, do we use 360 or personality? Like, which one is most effective to use for this person? What's your stance on that, Peter?
Yeah, good. So ideally, we try to use both so that we capture the private and the public person, and both of those are the key to career success. So I have a couple of quotes, Kate. Personality assessments without the Hogan 360 is only half the jigsaw. So if you've only got the personality data, which is a brilliant starting point, you get to know the individual quite intimately in terms of their values and their preferred behaviours, but we don't know what's on display at work. You don't know whether there's learned competencies, good habits, bad habits. You can only capture that with a 360. So it's only half the picture. And remember, the 360 is your personal brand. That's what people think about you at work. That's how people look at you at work. And your 360, getting a good 360 and improving your 360 is the key to career success. And Kate, we've even got a couple of companies at the moment that are pitching the 360 as part of a leadership program where it's about building career success. And that's why you want to give people a baseline now so they can do better.
And I really like the term you use, baseline, Peter, because another question I hear quite often from clients is they say, we're using the Hogan personality assessments and we've been coaching off of them. And we want to rerun them now to see how the person's changed after a couple of years. So what's your stance on kind of how how personality works alone to benchmark?
Okay, good. So personality is pretty stable over a long period of time. My advice to clients is you don't need to repeat the Hogan personality assessments inside 5 years unless something significant or dramatic has changed. But the 360 could be done annually or biannually, and you could set a target for improvement. So the 360 is more immediately repeatable. It's where you can set a goal, a target. My score was, and I want to lift my score. So for example, in Shell, they've been using our 360 for about 7 or 8 years now. They set a target of getting 75th percentile results. They don't want it to be just in the middle of the park at 50 percentile. They want to get gold standard outcomes. So that's what you can do with a 360.
And Peter, can you talk a little bit around kind of how 360 and personality work together to help that person understand their public versus private self a little more?
Of course. So we often say personality, it's not fate, it's really opening a door to the competencies you need to learn or display at work to be a high performer. So the model on this slide actually comes from Mark Efron, and he's a big fan of the Hogan business, and it comes from a book, Steps to High Performance. And the way he describes it is there is core personality, we are hardwired, but luckily we can make behaviour choices in life. About building competencies. It's like someone who says, I'm not a natural public speaker, but I go to Toastmasters and I learn the basics of speaking and I can pull it off. And people say, oh, you're a good speaker, but I do get nervous and tongue-tied beforehand, but I can pull it off. So that's the great thing about leadership. Leadership is learnable. The best leaders are the best learners. So we say core personality and your behaviour choices in life is how others see us. And that's a really good model. And I've got a quote there from Dr. Hogan, combining 360 data with personality data. We compare the public servant person with the private person to build strategic awareness and career success. So, Kate, one of the things we like to do is use science, gold standard assessments to deliver business outcomes. That's the whole intent, return on investment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Peter. And I think for everyone entering the workforce, it can be kind of confronting where you come in and you have the personality you have, but you're suddenly being asked to be all these things and deliver more results. And to me, the 360 really provides that useful lens of what are the aspects of your behavior that you want to learn to invest in or modify to really get to those outcomes and results for the company and for yourself personally for your career. And I think probably everyone who's here on the call has some interest in their professional development, either for themselves or for their organizations. Can you talk a little bit about the new model that you've introduced to help leaders guide their personal development and think about that elevation of capability?
Sure. So, Kate, this is brand new research that we only launched last week. It's in a podcast, Hogan, The Science of Personality, number 99. And we triangulated research from 360 data, personality data, and the Hogan competency model, which is a world-class competency framework. So drawing on our brilliant research, we have a fantastic research team, we came up with the concept of 5 essential building blocks for managers and leaders. And down the bottom, the journey is from self-awareness to self-management, and the goal is eventually self-mastery. So these are like building blocks or building a scaffold for thinking about how you grow individuals into good managers and then good leaders. So number one is conscientiousness. Think of a graduate that's 26 years old. They might be an engineer. What you want to see is conscientiousness, professionalism, performance, planning, organising, quality work, being able to do a great job. Then you move into the second competency, which is EQ. And we talk both about emotional and social competence, being resilient, being socially skilled. And the definition would be, are you rewarding to work with? Do you make others feel valued? Are you a popular member of the team? And then number 3 is a passion for results. Do we deliver the numbers? Are we achieving our KPIs? Are we driving the business plan? Are we having an impact, achieving outcomes? And number 4 is big picture thinking. So I've called this one strategic, thinking 3 years on, having a 1-year plan, driving innovation, being big picture rather than tactical, up on the balcony, not on the dance floor. And then inspiring is the final piece of the cake, the icing on the cake, where you are passionate, influential, motivational, and you really drive the employee engagement, which is getting good engagement scores and low turnover. Now, I'm a big fan of John Kotter, the business plan from the business professor from Harvard Business School. And he says everyone needs to be a good manager. which is running the trains on time, and a good leader, creating the future of transport. So they're not opposites. At various stages, we all need to be good managers and good leaders. Even the CEO might have to pay attention to board reports, which would take you back to conscientiousness at step one. So that's the research, Kate, that can inform our coaching and our leadership programs.
And I really like this research, Peter, because I think it gives a clear kind of pathway to people where, as you say, you know, they might come in at the entry level where they have that strong level of conscientiousness, and it might be much more difficult for them to have that more strategic perspective or be at that inspiring level. But you help people realize these are just building blocks and that there is a progression behind them. And I know that there's another great thought leader who's kind of inspired your thinking around this. Do you want to talk a little bit about your other favorite?
Yeah, Jim Collins is hard to beat. He's got that famous quote about get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. But if anyone wants to Google Jim Collins, look for his definition of level 5 leadership. Level 1's a supervisor, and then you progress to level 5. But the key differential about a level 5 leader, I think, picks up on the previous slide. They're strategic and inspiring. They've got a vision for the future. They drive the purpose. They drive the goals. It's about the cause, the mission. Who are we? What are we here to do? How do we make a difference to the community? How do we impact our customers? And he says a level 5 leader is passionate about the purpose of the business. So you think a non-for-profit like World Vision, reducing world poverty. You know, you've got some great organisations that can drive the purpose. And so it's big picture thinking. But the second thing, Kate, is we use that purpose and level 5 passion to build the employee experience. Why is our work important? Why does the workforce matter? Because they're the ones that are developing the products and services to have the social impact. So we encourage a lot of our clients to aim for level 5 leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Peter. And something that stands out to me too is that, you know, not all leaders naturally come about being those level 5 leaders, but that everyone can work on it. The interesting side to that coin is, do the organizations always necessarily know what they're trying to develop when we talk about level 5 leadership? I mean, so often when I talk to companies, they might not have even necessarily defined what is their leadership model or what separates a really great leader for that organization. And, you know, every organization's on a different journey around getting there. But something that I've been very impressed with about PBC's research team is our willingness to answer these questions empirically. So in addition to publishing the 360, PBC also takes time to actually do research on the data that we see in those responses and what it teaches us about leadership. And one of the most compelling findings was when we looked at all of our kind of C-suite executives, and how does the top 10th percentile of leaders compare to the bottom 10% of leaders when we're talking about that C-suite? And you can see here the data was very direct, very compelling. And keep in mind, this is based on a sample of literally thousands of leaders, but we saw this very clear relationship that what the top CEOs do best was that strong leadership skills. They were visionary and strategic. They were motivating to others, and they built those effective relationships, which probably no surprise fits in very closely with the model Peter just shared. And when we look at the converse, we can say that for the leaders who were kind of at that bottom 10%, so they had really low 360 scores, that those were all areas that they really struggled in. So when we're thinking about, you know, either for developing our leaders or for succession planning and saying, you know, what are we going to invest in for this person to make them an exemplary leader? It's really investing in those pieces around leadership and visionary, inspiring capabilities that are going to make the difference for CEOs who are really seen as leading organizations where people are engaged and want to follow them. Is there anything else that you want to add to this research, Peter? I know you spearheaded it.
No, I think the next slide also, you know, validates this model that you're talking to.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. What I often hear clients talking to me about is, from a succession planning perspective, how do we actually go about looking at which of our high potentials have what it takes to really be great leaders? And this gets to the heart of what Peter was referring to in terms of the difference between some days we're managers, some days we're leaders. Everybody needs a little bit of both. Right. But when we look at really what separates the C-suite from management, again, this is all based on our looking at 360 results and who scored the highest there. is that those CEOs really bring that bigger perspective to a strategic and inspiring approach to what they do. Whereas for managers, we see, yes, they work hard, they have a strong work ethic, they get there because they have the technical knowledge and they've got the experience and knowledge to get things done. But what's really going to get you to the top of that executive pipeline is that interpersonal and inspiring side that we've talked about before. So we've talked a little bit around these different ways that we've used 360s for succession planning, for coaching. So maybe, Peter, we should kind of spell it out and summarize, like, what are the different ways that we see clients, we recommend clients using 360s?
Good. Okay. So I'm conscious of the clock. I'm going to have to be quite succinct here. So what we wanted to do was show you a couple of case studies, different industries, different organizations. The first point would be the 360 is a mainstream HR tool these days. I would say 90% of companies in the Western world are using a multi-rater assessment. So number one, we worked with a big construction engineering company recently where we coached and profiled all of the managers. And as that project was coming to an end, many of them were moving up the ladder to take on project leadership roles in other projects. So there was a real emphasis on taking a hands-on manager into that leadership space to get them ready for their next career move. Number two, contract renewal. We've been working with a big university and it's done transparently. It's fairly open. We do 360s and that can help inform the discussion around whether one of those academics is getting a contract renewed or not. So it's based on what do your staff think about you, your peers. Three, restructure. Again, you've got to be upfront and transparent. A number of organisations are saying we want to collect 360 data to just inform who's best suited for new roles as we restructure. We want to get the right people in the right spots and make sure that we're doing that well. For succession planning, we worked with a publicly listed company to profile all of the executives. We used not just personality and 360, but cognitive testing. And we wrote up a profile of everyone, including their potential and the board was really happy that they had that data. Number five, we work with too many dysfunctional teams, Kate, to tell too many stories here, but they're fairly common. And we go in and we use the diagnostics. We try to get them focused on a shared business plan, a team charter for the behaviour, because that can be really damaging to the business. Six, we're doing a lot of work for boards. Boards are saying, how do we know if the CEO is effective? How do we know whether the CEO's team is effective? And we say, let's use the 360, maybe personality as well. But the 360 data is then like good governance, a risk assessment profile coming from a board. And seven, talent analytics, looking at capability in the organisations, who's getting great 360s, who are the high potentials, who should go on a leadership program, and who could be part of a succession plan. So, Kate, there's no end to the opportunities for using a 360.
Yeah, that's really true. And we'll share some of these case studies in follow-up. I think there's questions around analytics or how we use this in coaching, and we'll definitely circulate those to have more one-on-one conversations with you. Now, as Peter said, there's no end to applications for the 360, but definitely the most prominent one where it all starts is in coaching the individual, right? It doesn't do any good to put a person through the 360 if you never share the results with them. And this is something we monitor very closely in terms of how prevalent 360s are in coaching, because that tells us a lot about how the market is thinking about these instruments. So we're very happy to see that Hogan personality assessments remains the tool of choice for executive coaching. 71% of organizations prefer that tool for their coaching. And 92% of organizations use some version of a 360 for their coaching. So there's a lot of strong growth on both sides of this market, but we see a lot more diversity in terms of the 360 coaching, and I will talk about that. But maybe, Peter, if you could speak to a bit more around where you see these two instruments fitting together in the coaching process.
Sure. So the global trends at the moment, Kate, is building capability or competencies throughout the organisation. And globally, these are the four hot topics at the moment. Executive presence is being coached. We want in that transition from manager to leader, what's the gravitas that you have? Can you drive the purpose and the goals and the values? Are you persuasive? Secondly is emotional intelligence. That's a no-brainer. 3 is influencing others, which is interesting. Not just getting results off your own bat, getting results through relationships, which is where that inspiring leader can motivate teams and workforces to get outcomes. And finally, you've got to be a little bit strategic. So it's the vision and the strategy. So that's where a lot of development focus is at the moment. And of course, we always say use the personality and 360 data to inform that coaching experience. What comes naturally to you and what will have to be learned through deliberate practice and building new mental muscle.
It's very true, Peter. And as much as I love that statistic that, organizations are using 360s to do that in their coaching, I also feel a little bit conflicted because I know that not all 360s are created equal. We see a lot of them on the market where it's not really clear exactly what they're measuring or how that person scored or really if they even actually correlate with what they're measuring. So we at PBC really believe very strongly in using evidence-based 360s. As Peter's mentioned, we're very proud that our 360 correlates so strongly with the Hogan personality assessments. There's a lot of strength we could take from that data. But when we look at the 360 market overall, we have seen a significant increase in the number of organizations that are using 360-degree feedback to inform those. Now, you can see the trend line pretty clearly here in terms of how much more prevalent 360s have become since the 90s when they first started kind of getting on radar. And by the way, this data comes from the Society of Human Resource Management, which is a very prevalent organization in the US for monitoring these things. The trend that I think doesn't show off the slide here is that what we use 360s for has evolved quite a bit over the past few years. So in the 90s, when 360s first were becoming really much more prevalent for organizations, often organizations were purely using them for performance management purposes. And then later in the 2000s, we saw that trend where we kind of swung the other way, where we made 360s a little bit like a horoscope, where it was something very private that you just kept to yourself and took with it what you wanted to, and that was that. Where we are today is probably a nice middle ground, where PBC's stance would be that, yes, of course, 360's primary role is for individual development, for a career and personal perspective, and that can bring a lot of fulfillment for that individual to have those conversations and get that feedback. That being said, there is a component still of looking at a leader's performance, that this is really our best possible tool to hold leaders accountable, to judge the leader by their team, to look at the impact that they're having on their team and their organization more broadly. So we're finding a middle balance there. And we think the Hogan 360 is really uniquely positioned to do that well because of the strong data that we have behind it. So Peter, do you want to talk a bit about what we think makes for a good 360?
Absolutely. Because as you said, not all 360s are created equally. So look, when we look at the 360 market, a lot of 360s are flawed. They don't have a lot of science or benchmarking material. They don't give you a score. They don't measure the soft and hard skills. So let me just quickly comment on 6 aspects of why we think our 360 jumps a lot of hurdles. On the left, the technical manual, everything we do is research driven. We have a lot of science sitting there. We can constantly do research, benchmarks, white papers, and we can validate that the 360 is reliable, science-based. The second one, your score. Our 360 does give you a unique score. It adds up the aggregated items, and you get a score against an international benchmark. You could be at the 90th percentile, which would be an awesome outcome. You could be at the 50th percentile. That's the most common. Or you could be at the bottom 10 percentile, which would be a real wake-up call. Now, the beauty of the score is you can then set a KPI. What do I want to do with my 360 next time round? What goal am I aiming for? And I mentioned Shell setting a target of being at the 75th percentile for their managers. Global benchmarks, our 360 is in 25 languages. It's used right across the world. It's in different industries and at different levels, C-suite, middle managers. So we can talk to our clients about having benchmarks. We have a unique strengths and opportunities table that no other 360 provider has, where raters are being asked, pick 4 strengths, pick 4 opportunities. We tabulate the results, and that makes the action planning so crystal clear. Custom options, we do design 360s from the ground up. We look at an organization's capability framework or competency framework, and then we can map the 360 items to that, and you can have a bespoke internal 360, still with benchmarks and validity. So we're very happy to work with clients that want something quite specific to their own needs. Value for money, it's not expensive, Kate. It's exceptional value for money to be able to give someone a 360 and watch their journey towards self-mastery.
Very well said, Peter. Now, speaking of value for money, I promised these nice people on our webinar that we would have time to get to their questions, and I want to make sure that we make good on that. So I'm going to actually skip ahead so that we do have time, because we've gotten a lot of questions coming through in the chat and people have quite a bit they want to know. So we might do a little bit of a lightning round in the time we've got left. My first question for you, Peter, is disengagement. Do you see it going up, down? What has been the historical trend over the past few years since you've been watching this?
Unfortunately, it's static. So what we've been saying for the last 10 years, it's sitting at that 1 in 3 level. And it is a burning issue for organisations. It's got to be in the strategic plan, not just a HR function. The better companies are doing it better, and they're getting a return on investment straight to the bottom line.
Well said. Now, can you talk a little bit around looking at employees' potential versus their current capability and how you see the best way to measure those two things?
The employee's potential would be in the Hogan personality. So it's the private person, their values, their typical behaviours. Straight away, you can see what sort of competencies they can easily build at work. But remember, I said the best leaders are the best learners. So really, you take someone with good potential and you build capability, leadership programs, coaching, and the old 70-20-10 rule of learning. 70% happens on the job through deliberate practice, 20% happens through coaching and mentoring and team building, and 10% through reading and studying. So we always like to see the potential of someone, but we know it's really what you build on top of it through hard work.
And I'll add to that for Lauren, who asked the question, assessment centers are really just one other way to measure performance, but that's at a point in time, as is the 360. Those do work together, and I'm happy to talk with you more about how we do that. Next question for you, Peter, is how customizable is the Hogan 360? How do you approach customization?
Okay, so typically we say to an organisation, let's design your competency or capability framework together, so you're not building a house of cards by yourself that's not based on science, scientific, valid, reliable data. So we'd like to influence the development of that model so that it does have rigour. And then we talk about how would you correlate that to personality outcomes, which of the scales would tell you that you could be doing well there. And then we design a bespoke 360 that's going to reflect exactly those capabilities. And all the items in the 360 will come out of our bank where we have benchmarks. So we still keep the science going to inform that capability. So we've done some exceptional work with clients in the last year or two, helping them build their capability frameworks. So the answer is very customizable.
Yeah. And as well, we can use the personality assessments to help those organizations understand, even at a more deep level, what their values are, their leadership model. Peter, how should someone go about reintroducing a 360 if someone's had a bad 360 experience previously?
Yeah, good question. So it's really the setup of the 360 in the first instance. Are we doing it for good reasons? Career development opportunities, professional development. Sometimes it's used politically, which is not good. So there's got to be trust in the process of why we're doing the 360. We like to then explain the benefits of what does our 360 model offer? What are you going to get out of that experience? And set it up further, Kate. So will there be 3 coaching sessions to follow up? Will you be sitting down with your manager, and your manager will be there to support your development? So it's all got to be pitched positively to overcome, unfortunately, what might have been some negative experiences in the past.
And I think giving the participant as much control as possible so they feel they have some autonomy in the process goes a long way. Now, we are right at 11 o'clock, Peter. You've passed the lightning round. You survived it. I think we're both happy to stick around for a few more minutes if people have more questions, but otherwise we are very happy to follow up with you. And please reach out to us on LinkedIn, send us a note. We love to connect with people, and we're always very happy to talk with you about your individual circumstances, particularly when it comes to 360s. It's very personalized. But Peter and I love this stuff, and there's nothing we'd rather do than talk with you about your unique situation and how we can make it work for you. So please don't be a stranger. Please reach out. Let us know your feedback, your questions, and we will see you at our next webinar. I don't know what our next one is actually, but you'll be getting an email about that soon. Thanks for coming, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.